Chapter 1. After coming out of the Cryo-Medical Experimental Center, Gu Qingyao's body, which had not been able to move freely for 5 years, felt slightly warm. In fact, 5 years ago, when he had to choose cryosurgery because he was suffering from a terminal illness, he never thought that he would have the chance to open his eyes and see the light again. At that time, almost everyone in High City knew that in order to save her husband's life, the technological genius Sier Ruoyan spent all her family wealth to send Gu Qingyao for cryotherapy. Everyone laughed at her wild ideas, but also lamented her obsession with love. Only Sier Ruoyan firmly believed that her Yao would definitely come back. And the facts a month ago proved that this infatuated woman made the right bet. Not only were the cancer cells in Gu Qingyao's body completely eradicated, he also successfully woke up. In the frozen experiment coffin, Gu Qingyao will always remember the first thing he saw after waking up. Sier Ruoyan was standing beside him, with red eyes and a hoarse voice. "Io, I knew you wouldn't be so cruel as to abandon me. You finally came back." Doctors and friends all congratulated him, saying that perhaps it was Mr. Sier's deep affection for waiting that moved God, and finally a miracle happened. Gu Qingyao thought so too. Sier Ruoyan is the miracle of his life. He couldn't wait to get back to normal as soon as possible, to start a new life with her, to make up for the tears in her eyes, and the 5 years of loneliness and suffering. It was not until the third day after he returned home that he saw a young man appear in the house. A young man whose appearance and figure are exactly the same as Gu Qingyao. Sier Ruoyan introduced, "Io, don't be afraid, he is the bionic robot butler of the family, and he is here to take care of you. By the way, his name is Jiang Yao." Gu Qingyao looked at the bionic man in front of him in horror, who looked no different from a human. Only then did he realize that this bionic robot was a confidential product developed by Sier Ruoyan's company. It has not yet been put into production, but because Sier Ruoyan missed him so much that she became sick, she personally created Jiang Yao according to Gu Qingyao's data 3 years ago and brought him home. Seeing Gu Qingyao open his eyes in disbelief and showing resistance, Sier Ruoyan explained. "I just asked him to be a housekeeper and help take care of our home. Yao, you know that I have been working very hard in the past few years and I can't let myself stop, because once I relax, I will miss you." Seeing that Gu Qingyao still looked unhappy, she paused and quickly compromised. "You are still recovering and need someone to take care of you. Jiang Yao's employment agreement with me will expire in a month. I will send him to the RD Center for recycling at that time." Gu Qingyao nodded reluctantly. Maybe it was his illusion. When Jiang Yao, who was cleaning not far away, heard that he was about to be sent for recycling, his movements froze for a moment imperceptibly. Gu Qingyao, who had just woken up, was very dependent on Sier Ruoyan. The housekeeper Jiang Yao seemed to have listened to her instructions and rarely appeared in front of him. Looking at Sier Ruoyan, who took care of him personally and attentively, the slight discomfort in Gu Qingyao's heart gradually disappeared. But one day, he accidentally saw a popular blogger on his mobile phone. The blogger's name is Sier Ruoyan. The blogger, who does not show his face, has been recording every detail of his love affair with the heroine since 3 years ago. The updates they posted were sometimes photos of sweet kisses, and sometimes recordings of her soft complaints after a passionate love affair, and his patient and low-key coaxing. If he didn't know that he had been asleep for 5 years, Gu Qingyao would have almost mistakenly believed that these were all the moments he and Sier Ruoyan had spent together. Looking at the mole under the collarbone of the woman in the photo, listening to the gentle voice that he was so familiar with, Gu Qingyao sat there for a whole day, laughing until tears came out. He couldn't help but want to ask several times, how could Sier Ruoyan wait for him to wake up while being so affectionate with another man? Is there another bionic robot in this world that looks exactly like Sier Ruoyan? His painful hesitation continued until last night. Yesterday was Gu Qingyao's birthday. Sier Ruoyan personally prepared a candlelight dinner, but suddenly received a few messages. She then looked guilty and had to leave him alone at home to eat. Gu Qingyao watched her hurry out the door. The mobile phone on the table rang, and it was the Sier Ruoyan that she was paying special attention to, who had just released a new update. It was a chat record. In the photo sent out by the blogger, there were 5 boxes of family planning products between his abdominal muscles. The other party replied a minute ago. "Sister, wait for me. You are allowed to use it all on me tonight." Gu Qingyao enlarged the photo and saw clearly the inconspicuous red birthmark somewhere on the blogger's lower abdomen, which was exactly the same as his own. In the warm candlelight, he thought of the tender and charming look in Sier Ruoyan's eyes that just expressed emotion, and answered the phone in a trance. Mr. Gu, the sequelae of physical decline that you mentioned last time already have a solution. The voice on the other end was awkward. I'm sorry, your sequelae are progressing too quickly. We can only choose to replace you with a new body at the moment. If you don't consider it, we can do it later. The candlelight flickered, reflecting the cold tears in the corners of Gu Qingyao's eyes. He said softly, I agree. Really? That's great, please come to the lab, we need to sign a contract. Half an hour later, Gu Qingyao raised his less flexible hand, signed his name solemnly, and said, Please follow the requirements of my contract and keep everything confidential. The person in charge nodded. Don't worry, it will take a week to reserve a new body. After a week, we will be responsible for secretly transplanting your heart and memories into your new body and burying your current body. Chapter 2. In the evening, the last ray of golden light in the sky gradually disappeared into the dark clouds. On the way home, Gu Qingyao answered the phone and heard Sier Ruoyan's nervous voice. Io, why aren't you at home? Why did you run out alone? Are you still blaming me for not spending your birthday with you last night? She said carefully, I'm sorry, the group's affairs have been piling up a lot recently, and I'm under a lot of pressure. I have to finish them as soon as possible. After I'm done with this, I'll definitely be with you every day. Even if you think I'm annoying, I'll still stick with you. Gu Qingyao actually heard a hint of coquettishness and flattery in her voice. He raised his lips slightly, and after a while he said, No, how could I blame you? I just went to the medical center for a routine checkup. The woman was visibly relieved. At this time, the sky by the river flickered for a few moments, and the surprised cheers of passers-by could be heard. Swoosh pop. Gu Qingyao also looked up and was stunned. At some point, the sky was suddenly filled with giant, gorgeous fireworks, one after another, illuminating the entire city with grandeur and splendor. On the phone, Sier Ruoyan smiled sweetly. Io, do you like it? This is a surprise I prepared for you. It makes up for the regret of not being able to spend your birthday with you yesterday. Gu Qingyao didn't expect that she still remembered it. Earlier than 5 years ago, when they had just started dating, they loved watching fireworks together and kissing under the bright night sky. Sier Ruoyan said coquettishly, If I make you angry one day, I will set off a fireworks display for you. Yao must forgive me after watching the fireworks. There were bright fireworks reflected in Gu Qingyao's pupils, and there was an unclear bitterness in his eyes, but his cell phone rang with a special alert tone. He clicked on it and saw that the blogger had posted a new update. Last night's results can be checked. She is under a lot of pressure, and she likes to vent and relax when she is with me. She is willing to be played with by me and says that this is the moment she enjoys the most. In the photo, there were only messy private clothes on the floor, torn stockings, and many used umbrellas. Io, did you see that? My confession to you is hidden in the fireworks. In the headphones, the woman's soft voice was full of affection. Gu Qingyao raised his eyes blankly. At this moment, the grand fireworks exploding in the sky were in the shape of a heart, with his name written in the middle. Wow, this is so romantic. I envy this Yao so much, his wife must love him so much. As passers-by talked enviously, he stared at it for a few seconds and then lowered his head again. The bright reflection of the fireworks was reflected on the photos on the mobile phone screen, making my eyes swell. After a while, he finally said, I see. Sier Ruoyan thought he was too touched and smiled softly, Io, I love you and will wait for you to come back. Gu Qingyao quickly hung up the phone, held onto the railing, trembling all over and vomited. Even though I already knew that she and Jiang Yao had been together for 3 whole years, when I actually saw those photos with my own eyes, I couldn't help but imagine the specific details of every time they were together. He felt so nauseous that he broke out in cold sweats. He vomited until he could no longer vomit anything, then he slowly stood up. It was already late when I got home. Sier Ruoyan noticed at first glance that he looked unhappy. She blamed the driver in a cold voice and also criticized the housekeeper Jiang Yao. How did you take care of Yao? Jiang Yao looked at him aggrievedly and came over to apologize, but Gu Qingyao noticed an unconcealed red mark somewhere on his collarbone. He instantly felt nauseous again, but after a lot of effort he managed to hold it back and said calmly, "Ruoyan, don't be so harsh. After all, he will be sent for recycling in a week. Besides, he has taken my place and worked hard for you day and night for 3 years." Sier Ruoyan looked at him with a guilty look in her eyes. But then she said with a firm look on her face, "He is just a bionic man, how can he be compared with you?" As if to please him, she mentioned, "The day you wake up 1 month later will also be our wedding anniversary. I will arrange a grand ceremony to announce the good news that the male owner of Ruoyao Group has woken up. Ah Yao, you will definitely like it." Gu Qingyao stared at her affectionate eyes intently, and only raised his lips after a long while. "Ruoyan, you really love me." Sier Ruoyan hugged him tightly and whispered, "You only know it now. I really love you, so I won't allow you to leave me again like you did 5 years ago, otherwise I will really die." Gu Qingyao felt her warm body temperature and slowly lowered his eyelashes. Late at night, Sier Ruoyan still accompanied him to sleep, never taking her eyes off him. He turned sideways with his back to her, and suddenly felt short of breath. Gu Qingyao knew that although he had awakened, cryotherapy was still in the experimental stage, and his body showed signs of gradual decay after thawing. The only way to prolong his life is to entrust the medical center to build a new body tailor-made for him. He had rejected this idea outright before, not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid that Sier Ruoyan would not be able to accept it. She used to love lingering on every part of his body, describing his facial features over and over again with her affectionate eyes, kissing the birthmark on his belly, and hugging him gently but firmly. Once, in the reflection of Sier Ruoyan's beautiful eyes, Gu Qingyao saw himself being deeply loved. Unfortunately, his 5 years were just asleep, and when he woke up he naively thought that nothing had changed. But the 5 years with Sier Ruoyan no longer belonged to him. In the quiet bedroom, Sier Ruoyan was handling group work and accidentally clicked on a new voice message. "Io is hungry and wants to eat yin-yens." She hurriedly turned off the screen and quickly looked at the person on the bed. Gu Qingyao seemed to be sleeping soundly and was not woken up. His quiet appearance with his eyes closed looked like a merciful angel in an oil painting. Afterwards, Gu Qingyao felt a heat on his forehead. After the woman kissed him hello, she quietly closed the door and left. In the darkness, he opened his eyes, wiped away the remaining touch on his forehead with trembling fingers, and clicked on the blogger's new updates. The battle robe is ready. It's her favorite style. Wait for her to come. Gu Qingyao looked at the hollow uniform. After marriage, Sier Ruoyan once said that she liked to see him wearing this kind of bold and abstinent men's uniform the most, which made her unable to control herself and couldn't let it go after just one look. He looked out the window at the darkness and had not slept all night. Sier Ruoyan hurried back early the next morning. On the mobile phone, It's Her Yao also posted an update in the middle of the night. She said she didn't love me, but her body couldn't fool me. Countdown to breakup, 7 days. Chapter 3. Sier Ruoyan brought him the breakfast she had made herself and blew on the porridge to warm it up for him. "Io, your body is still recovering, so please concentrate on eating. We can play with the phone later." Gu Qingyao took one last glance at the screen. After, It's Her Yao released a breakup countdown, Fan's sky fell. "No. You two are so sweet, why would you suddenly break up? I am an old fan. I can see from all the clips over the past 3 years that she clearly loves him. It is impossible that they broke up because they didn't love him anymore. The woman's identity should be extraordinary. Was she forced into marriage by her family? I don't care. Whoever dares to separate us Io and Yen Yen will die." Gu Qingyao finished his breakfast in silence, and suddenly said, "Yen Yen, don't be too tired recently. You have dark circles under your eyes. Why do you suddenly call me like that?" Sier Ruoyan was stunned. This was the name Gu Qingyao called her when they were in love. She moved closer, as if remembering something, and hugged his waist. "Ah Yao, do you think I'm not as young and pretty as before?" Sier Ruoyan said softly, "Then I'll adjust my condition and you should also take care of your body. Let's do it together, okay? By the way, did the doctor say anything during the physical examination yesterday? Why have you become thinner and thinner after almost a month since you came back?" I don't even dare to hug you hard. Gu Qingyao did not answer her question. Sier Ruoyan kissed his face. I will accompany you well today. Let's go to a charity banquet in the afternoon. Yao said that after founding the group, we should give back to the society. I will keep it in mind. The charity foundation was named by Sier Ruoyan after Gu Qingyao, and tonight she also spent a huge sum of money in his name and donated hundreds of millions. When the two of them appeared hand in hand, they attracted the envy and admiration of everyone. A little girl who had heard of their love story plucked up the courage to come over and toast. Mr. Sier is a really good person and is blessed. I sincerely hope that you and your husband can live happily together until old age and have no worries in this life. Sier Ruoyan held Gu Qingyao's hand and smiled solemnly. Thank you, we will definitely do it. Gu Qingyao looked at the little girl's excited and yearning expression, and smiled, hiding the gloom in his eyes. Sier Ruoyan seemed to have some thoughts surging, and she sighed softly in his ear. Those people said that they believed in love again because of our story. But for me, all the love in my life is for you. Gu Qingyao looked into her affectionate eyes, his pupils trembled slightly, and was about to speak. At this moment, a low voice came from behind everyone. Mr. Sier. Gu Qingyao followed the gazes of the crowd and saw Jiang Yao holding a box of medicine in his hand, looking towards them. A man who looked exactly like Mr. Gu appeared at the scene, causing an uproar. Some people had shocked and complicated expressions, while those who were closer to Sier Ruoyan were not surprised. Sier Ruoyan first glanced at Gu Qingyao quickly, then lowered her voice. Who allowed you to come here? Jiang Yao was stunned and explained aggrievedly, Ruoyan, I am here to give you stomach medicine. You can't take your stomach problem lightly. The woman said in a reproachful tone, I don't need it. You are just a housekeeper. You need to know your limits. Being scolded in front of everyone, Jiang Yao's eyes turned red and he turned and left. His back stumbled and he almost fell. Gu Qingyao noticed that Sier Ruoyan's hanging fingers suddenly raised up, as if she subconsciously wanted to help. He lowered his brows, and the palm of the hand that was held by Sier Ruoyan began to break out in a cold sweat that made him feel nauseous. After the banquet, Sier Ruoyan noticed that he didn't eat much, and she looked worried, saying that she would go home and make porridge for him herself. After a while, she received a call. Then he looked at him apologetically and said, I have something urgent to do at work. Let the driver take you home first. I will come back to coax you to sleep in the evening. Outside the car window, a woman was walking away quickly in her high heels. Gu Qingyao withdrew his gaze and clicked on the new updates on his phone. What should I do if I make her angry? She said I should try a new posture to coax her. Not long after, the blogger uploaded several short videos in succession. The picture was shaky and dim, but the background sound was filled with the man's impatient gasps and the woman's gentle and excited sobs. Where are you going, sir? Just as the driver was about to drive away, the person in the back seat suddenly got out and walked in a certain direction without looking back. Gu Qingyao walked all the way to the familiar corridor in the background of the video. At the corner of the corridor not far from the banquet hall, he stopped abruptly when he heard a faint noise. Yen, you are so great. The man's desperately suppressed hoarse roar echoed throughout the silent and deserted corridor. Soon, a familiar soft female voice came into my ears. Yao, I want to die on you. Chapter 4. Behind the corner, Gu Qingyao covered his pale face with his hands and suddenly bent down to vomit, but only made some painful and silent dry heaves. It was not until late at night that Sier Ruoyan came back. Sier Ruoyan already knew that Gu Qingyao looked unwell and had not eaten tonight. She walked into the room exhausted, her eyes full of nervous worry. What's wrong with you? Gu Qingyao's pale lips moved and his eyes fell on the mottled red mark under her collar. He shook his head. It's okay, I'm much better now. Ruoyan, there are only a few days left, can you stay with me? Sier Ruoyan frowned blankly. What do you mean, how many days are left? Oh, you mean our anniversary ceremony next week? She relaxed and smiled. Of course, I will be with you not only for these few days, but also for the rest of my life. We are going to grow old together. Gu Qingyao closed his eyes slightly, pursed his lips and said nothing. Before Sier Ruoyan coaxed him to sleep, a familiar figure came to the bedroom door. Mr. Gu, I'm here to apologize to you. I shouldn't have shown up at the charity banquet today without permission. Gu Qingyao looked at Jiang Yao at the door. It was very strange. Although it was a face exactly like his own, he felt more and more that Jiang Yao was a different person. Sier Ruoyan seemed to be surprised that Jiang Yao would suddenly appear. She frowned slightly, and only relaxed her brows when she heard that he came to apologize. Jiang Yao's voice was very soft and a little hoarse, as if he had been tired for a long time and had not recovered yet. He continued, "But Mr. Sier, you broke my things this afternoon. Didn't you promise to compensate me? I'm still waiting to use it." Sier Ruoyan was stunned, her eyes quickly swept over his long legs in suit pants. He stuttered for a rare moment, looked at Gu Qingyao, and explained. "Ahem. I accidentally damaged the housekeeper's clothes this afternoon. Yao, you go to sleep first. I'll go out and deal with it and be back soon." Her breathing became a little disordered. She stared at Jiang Yao as if warning and restraining herself. She then comforted Gu Qingyao with a few words before closing the door and leaving. Gu Qingyao retracted his gaze and looked at himself in the mirror beside the bed. He finally noticed something was different. Jiang Yao is just like he was 5 years ago before he got sick, lively, young, and strong. At this moment, the man in the mirror looked haggard, pale and weak as his body deteriorated further and further. Ahem. His brows froze and he actually spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt uncomfortable in all his internal organs. Fortunately, this decaying body will be replaced soon. And Gu Qingyao is about to disappear from Sier Ruoyan's world. Perhaps because he was too weak, Gu Qingyao fell into a deep sleep that night. When I woke up the next day, the pillow and quilt beside me were cold. Sier Ruoyan had not returned home all night again. The homepage of It's Her IO also updated 2 posts. In the first photo, it was a slender ankle hanging in the crook of a man's bare arm. The new clothes she gave me as compensation were torn by her again. The second photo shows 5 sets of sexy and private uniforms. She bought 5 new sets to appease me. She said she would buy 1 set a day for the last 5 days. She didn't know that I agreed with a smile, but my heart was hurting. Countdown to breakup, 5 days. Fans were all feeling sorry for the loyal blogger who loved humbly, and were angrily cursing the scumbag woman. However, one comment was ranked as the most liked. If 2 people who are so compatible from soul to body really don't end up together, I can't imagine the regret. Gu Qingyao stared at the comment in a daze and suddenly logged into his old account. Sure enough, the last text update was 5 years ago. This account records every detail of how he and Sier Ruoyan met and fell in love. Although there are not many fans, they often urge for updates, saying that it is impossible to meet a woman as infatuated as Sier Ruoyan in real life, and that they can continue to believe in love by looking at her online. Ever since he fell ill, he updated less and less, but they were all content related to Sier Ruoyan. There are nearly 100,000 comments under the last post asking people to check in. Gu Qingyao clicked on it and saw the comment with the most likes. Such a perfect match for a pair of lovers, but separated for such a desperate reason, leaving her alone in the world, with only regrets left in her life, no more love. A tear slid down the phone screen, leaving a blurry water stain. Gu Qingyao spent a day deleting all the love records on his account, leaving not a single one. In the evening, he went to the experimental center to input data and adjust preferences for the new body that was about to be built. Doctors had expected that he would want his new body to look similar to his current one. Gu Qingyao just shook his head. "I want to become a completely different person and start a new life." After he dragged his weak body back, as soon as he opened the door, he was suddenly hugged by the woman who rushed towards him. Sier Ruoyan stood on tiptoe and buried her head behind his neck, her voice trembling slightly. "Io, why didn't you answer the phone? I've been looking for you all day. Why did you delete all the records of our relationship?" Chapter 5. She hugged Gu Qingyao's hands tightly, as if she wanted to embed herself into his body, her tone panicked and helpless. "Did I delete it by mistake? Or are you mad at me, Yao?" Sier Ruoyan raised her head again, her eyes red, and looked at Gu Qingyao aggrievedly. "Those are all evidence of our love, and it is also the only account I follow. How could you delete them all without my permission? Io, do you know that during the 5 years you were away, I was able to survive relying on those records and memories?" Gu Qingyao stared at her red eyes. Sier Ruoyan always acted cold and arrogant outside, and only in front of him would she act like a child with red eyes. His slightly cool fingertips touched the corners of her eyes comfortingly as usual, but his tone was calm. I just want a fresh start. After all, the me now is the me who has finally survived 5 years later. I am completely different from the me 5 years ago. We are two completely different people. Sier Ruoyan's eyes were stunned. For some reason, this sentence made her feel panicked for a moment. It was like she was clearly hugging the person in front of her, but the tighter she hugged, the more she felt powerless, as if she was about to lose him. Maybe it was because he had just returned, and she felt that the living him in front of her was too much like a bubble that would disappear in a dream at the touch of a finger. Looking at Gu Qingyao's calm expression, Sier Ruoyan could only force a smile. Okay, it's time for us to have a new beginning. This time, we don't need a Yao. Let me record it. Record our love for 5 years, 10 years, or even a lifetime. For the next 2 days, Sier Ruoyan stayed at home to accompany Gu Qingyao. I would hold him to sleep at night, repeating in his ear over and over again. "Io, I love you. I have lost you for 5 years. Every day of these 5 years has been a torment for me. One more day, one more hour, and I would be in so much pain that I would want to die. Luckily you're back. Promise me that you'll give me your whole life as compensation. We'll be together for the rest of our lives and never be apart again." Gu Qingyao's health had improved a little in the past 2 days, and his complexion looked much rosier. Sier Ruoyan was very happy, but he knew in his heart that this might just be the last glimmer of life of his body. It shouldn't have been consumed so quickly. But being sad not only hurts the mind, but also harms the body. That night, Sier Ruoyan took him out to attend the group's annual meeting. This was the first time that Gu Qingyao wore formal attire seriously since he woke up. The exquisite and expensive pure black suit made him look like a dark cloud that was about to disappear into the night. Seeing how he was dressed after getting off the car, Sier Ruoyan's eyes flashed with undisguised surprise, and there were even tears in her eyes. "Io, you are still as handsome as before. I am looking forward to our anniversary ceremony in 3 days." Sier Ruoyan took his hand, looked up and whispered to him, while walking towards the venue. "Mr. Gu, there are still some details that need to be finalized by Miss Sier, but I can't get through to her." There were several footsteps heard not far away. When the employee saw Mr. Sier, his eyes lit up immediately. "Mr. Sier, you've come here. What is this?" He froze in embarrassment. Why are there 2 Mr. Gu at the scene? When Gu Qingyao saw Jiang Yao standing opposite him in a professional suit, his heart sank. He is here too. Sier Ruoyan's eyes quickly flashed past the embarrassment, and she explained in a low voice. "Io, the group's business has expanded rapidly in the past 2 years, and I have a lot of social events. I don't want other men to get close to me, so I temporarily arranged for Jiang Yao to be my secretary and occasionally have him come to the company to accompany me to social events. Some new employees are unaware and admit their mistake. But don't worry, from today on, everyone in the group will know that you are my real husband." Gu Qingyao's breathing tightened as he watched from afar Jiang Yao, who was dressed neatly, moving calmly around the venue. Everyone called him Mr. Gu in a respectful and cautious tone. He looked at the big words, Ruoyao Group, on the top of the building and suddenly smiled. "No." Sier Ruoyan's expression changed slightly, and she hugged him nervously. "Are you unhappy? I will immediately fire the ignorant new employee just now. Io, don't be angry." "Thank you, Mr." Jiang Yao, who had just returned, looked over eagerly and reminded, "There is an urgent call from a partner. You need to go to the office now to answer it." Gu Qingyao was being held by Sier Ruoyan, with his back facing Jiang Yao, and he felt her body suddenly tense. Soon, Sier Ruoyan took him to sit down in the venue and pointed upstairs helplessly. "Io, wait for me. I'll come right after I finish the call." After saying that, she strode into the elevator with Jiang Yao, as if the matter was extremely urgent. Gu Qingyao lowered his eyes deeply, grasped the edge of his sleeve tightly with his fingertips, and tried to suppress his trembling. Although he had his back to Jiang Yao just now, there was a piece of glass in front of him. The reflective glass showed Jiang Yao blowing her a frivolous kiss while talking. Sier Ruoyan's body is very honest. He even felt her breathing quicken a little, which he was very familiar with. It was a sign that she was being aroused. It was not until the annual meeting was halfway through that Sier Ruoyan hurried over. There was even a blush on her fair face, and she said in a soft and apologetic voice, "The partner is a bit difficult to deal with." "I'm sorry, Yao." Gu Qingyao didn't say anything, just stared at the show on the stage. The next part was the year-end lottery. As the president's secretary, Jiang Yao won the special prize. The prize could fulfill any wish of the winner. In the warm atmosphere, the host called Mr. Sier to the stage to present the award. Many employees started to cheer and shouted, "Give me a kiss! Give me a kiss!" Sier Ruoyan's eyes became panicked and she quickly looked towards Gu Qingyao in the audience. Jiang Yao spoke in time, his eyebrows and eyes were low-key. "I don't have any wishes, I just hope that Mr. Sier can change a new desk. This table is too hard now. I'm worried that Mr. Sier will work too hard and hurt his body." Sier Ruoyan frowned and looked at Jiang Yao in shock, but the scenes of them huddling together on the cold and hard desk just now flashed through her mind, and her eyes were immersed in them for a few seconds. Gu Qingyao quietly withdrew his gaze and clicked on the new status on his phone. "I know that the special prize was a surprise she prepared for me. At least it allowed me to stand with her openly for the last time. We talked about our hidden love to our heart's content in front of a large crowd of guests. Countdown to breakup, 3 days." Gu Qingyao looked at the comments where people were crying and begging not to break up, and some people were giving the blogger advice. "She really loves you. Can't you think of a way to keep her here? How about pretending to be injured and have amnesia?" This comment shows, like by blogger. Sier Ruoyan quickly stepped off the stage, her eyes fixed on the screen of her mobile phone. "Io, what are you looking at?" Chapter 6. Gu Qingyao turned off the screen, a cold smile appearing on his lips. "Nothing." Sier Ruoyan thought he was unhappy, and frowned, feeling a little helpless. But she heard Gu Qingyao suddenly ask, "Ruoyan, if I lose my memory, will you still love me?" Sier Ruoyan was stunned for a long while. "Io, why do you ask that? Whether you lose your memory or not, I will love you as before. Is it because I have been neglecting you recently that you are unhappy again?" Io. Facing her cautious eyes, Gu Qingyao pulled the corner of his lips and said, "No, I'm just asking casually." After the annual meeting, Sier Ruoyan looked at her mobile phone and then made an excuse that she had business to ask the driver to take Gu Qingyao home first. Gu Qingyao had no interest in watching the game this time. "When I got home, my body, which had been holding on for half the night, fell heavily to the ground as if it were a block of lead. When I woke up again, it was already early morning. The house was dark and Sier Ruoyan had not returned yet. A new status appeared on the phone screen, showing the man's chest covered with ambiguous red marks. She was so passionate tonight, and it made me feel extremely happy. She said that tonight was our last night. She told me that she had carefully prepared all the surprises for her male lead and asked me not to come to her again in the future. Is this what it feels like to fall from heaven to hell? God, please let her love me a little longer, even for the last 3 days." Gu Qingyao stared at the marks on the man's body and slid his cold fingers across the screen. "Io really loves so humbly, so heartbreaking. Why can't people who love each other be together? Blogger, I can guarantee that Yen really loves you. If she is forced to be with someone else, she will not be happy in the future. I suggest you be brave and get Yen back." "No, so the woman is already in a relationship. Then isn't the blogger the male mistress? What do you know? A mistress is someone who is not loved. The 3 years that Io spent with Ian are irreplaceable." When Gu Qingyao saw the last 2 comments, his eyes became blank and a self-deprecating sneer appeared on his lips. After waking up the next day, he received new physical data adjusted by the experimental center. He looked at the completely unfamiliar face in the model and quickly replied, "Thank you, I am satisfied." The aroma of food wafted from outside the room, and Sier Ruoyan came in and called him gently. "Io, get up and eat." The woman had a slim and graceful figure and was wearing a home apron. The group employees would never have thought that the usually cold and arrogant President Sier would become such a considerate and virtuous wife when he got home. Gu Qingyao looked at her twice more, and Sier Ruoyan smiled, "Don't laugh at the way I wear an apron, I will only wear it for you." He shook his head and ate in silence. What he had just seen was not the apron but the kiss mark on the back of her neck. It really seemed like the same spot on her body where he had liked to place kisses 5 years ago. Today, Sier Ruoyan seemed determined to spend time with him. During dinner, she mentioned some details of tomorrow's anniversary ceremony and acted mysterious. I arranged everything myself, Io, you will definitely be very surprised tomorrow. Gu Qingyao ate slowly, but his stomach felt increasingly uncomfortable and his face turned pale. Sier Ruoyan noticed it and was about to speak with a worried look on her face. Ah! There was a crisp sound of a bowl being broken in the kitchen. Jiang Yao exclaimed, and Sier Ruoyan immediately stood up and walked over, speaking in a nervous tone. It's just washing dishes, why are you so careless? She held his cut finger. Jiang Yao frowned and shook his head. It's okay, I don't feel any pain. Sier Ruoyan blamed and felt distressed. I'll send you to the RD center to deal with it. Gu Qingyao looked at the intimate figures of the two and a layer of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. With difficulty, he tried to persuade her to stay. Ruoyan, I feel a little uncomfortable. Can you stay and accompany me? Sier Ruoyan was stunned, looked at him and then at Jiang Yao, and said hesitantly, I will send Jiang Yao to treat his wound first, and I will accompany you when I come back. Gu Qingyao stared at Jiang Yao's handsome face which was pretending to be strong. Seeing the same facial features as his own with this expression and standing closely with Sier Ruoyan, the scene before him almost made him want to vomit. He endured the pain and discomfort surging in his body and dug his nails into his palms. Ruoyan, you promised me that he will be sent to the RD center for recycling tomorrow. You should stay here tonight and accompany me for the last time, okay? Sier Ruoyan didn't have time to grasp what that last meant. She didn't understand why Gu Qingyao was so determined to pick a fight with a bionic man. She rarely looked down upon him and said in a cold voice, Io, you don't understand. Jiang Yao is the company's high-end confidential product, and I created it with great effort. He may just be a tool in your eyes, but to me, he is also a person with flesh and blood and emotions. He will also feel pain and sadness. Even if he has to be recycled tomorrow, as the person who created his life, I should be responsible for him to the end. The door slammed shut. Gu Qingyao's ears trembled and he could no longer hold back and vomited all over the floor, smiling bitterly. He knew that Sier Ruoyan would not come back tonight. In the middle of the night, after Gu Qingyao packed his small luggage, the screen of his cell phone lit up. Thank you all for the ideas. After I pretended to be injured and lost my memory, her reaction was 10,000 times more heartbroken than I thought. In the short video, the woman's hand carefully stroked his hair, her tone full of surprise and care. Io, don't be afraid, I won't leave you. The two kissed madly and entangled passionately. Although the camera was facing the dim ground, the sizzling sound of their saliva entangled was clearly audible. Even if you lose your memory, I will always be by your side. I will always love only you. The phone fell to the floor with a bang, and Gu Qingyao couldn't stop shaking all over. It turns out that Sier Ruoyan's sweet promises were not just for him. In the 3 years that he didn't know, perhaps she had already said it countless times to other men. The pointer on the wall passed 0, and today was their wedding anniversary. Gu Qingyao stood by the window, his body so thin that it seemed as if he could be blown away by the wind. He was editing the last words he left for Sier Ruoyan when a new update popped up on his phone. She said she wanted to give me a wedding, to give us a grand and desolate ending to these 3 years of darkness. Chapter 7. The blogger's homepage started live streaming the wedding. His heroine spent a huge amount of money on him, booked all the luxury stores in the city in the early morning, and personally chose a wedding dress for him. His heroine praised with tears in her eyes, Io, you are finally my groom. When the whole city was shrouded in silent stars, she took his hand and kissed him solemnly with eyes closed in front of the gorgeous lawn of the church. Under the cover of night, many fans witnessed together this love that escaped from the world and was extremely romantic. There were even a few eagle-eyed fans from the same city who recognized the location and rushed to watch the ceremony overnight. Ian really loves Io so much. The wedding was held overnight, but it didn't look hasty or perfunctory at all. These two are locked in for me. With such an unforgettable wedding, there will be no room for anyone else in their hearts for the rest of their lives. Gu Qingyao stood in the crowd, his eyes fixed on the newlyweds on the lawn. He came here because he recognized the church lawn. When they first started their business, he and Sier Ruoyan had little money, and they delayed holding their wedding after getting their marriage certificate. Sier Ruoyan knew that he felt guilty. One day, when she passed by this extremely expensive church in the city center, she happened to see someone having a wedding on the lawn. Both of them stared at the wedding. Gu Qingyao quietly witnessed the happiness of others and secretly made up his mind. When he turned around, he met Sier Ruoyan's smiling eyes. "Io, we must hold a grand wedding here that will be envied by everyone. I will wear the most beautiful wedding dress and wait for you." Before my eyes, the newlyweds finished their vows and the groom embraced and kissed the bride in her pure white wedding dress. Relatives and friends applauded and came forward to congratulate with heartfelt smiles. Gu Qingyao stood in the shadows behind the crowd and saw many familiar faces. Sier Ruoyan's family, her best childhood friend, the group's partners, etc., everyone had a sincere smile on their face. He remembered she had mentioned that these people were invited by her to attend their wedding anniversary ceremony to witness their renewed happiness. "Miss, you don't look well, are you cold?" Gu Qingyao vaguely heard the concerned voice beside him and shook his head. He raised his hand and realized that his face was covered with cold tears. He smiled softly and said, "No, I was just too moved." The wedding was over and the sky was lit up with brilliant fireworks. Gu Qingyao stared at the fireworks by himself until the end, then he came back to his senses and made a phone call. Sier Ruoyan hurriedly picked up the phone the third time. There was still a slight gasp in her voice, and her tone was apologetic. "Io, I have to go back to the company temporarily, you go to sleep first. The blogger's homepage has released new updates. Thank you all for your blessings. I'm going to celebrate my wedding night first." She said that she would stay with me until the last second before the world collapsed. 3 hours later, the morning star disappeared and spots of morning light appeared on the edge of the pale blue sky. Gu Qingyao did not sleep all night, his lips were dry and pale, like a plant that was withering to the end of its life. He went home, picked up his suitcase, went downstairs, and got into the car that came to pick him up from the experimental center. In a daze, he looked down and realized that he had forgotten to take off the wedding ring on his hand. There was silence in Gu Qingyao's eyes. He stopped the car when he saw the Ruoyao Group building passing by the car window. This plain ring was not expensive, but it was a surprise given to him by Sier Ruoyan when he just started his business. After that, the two worked together to grow the company from small to large until he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Now leaving the ring in the group and returning it to her can be considered a complete conclusion. At the front desk, Gu Qingyao had just left his ring and turned around to see Sier Ruoyan's slim figure surrounded by people. When she saw him suddenly appear here, she was obviously a little flustered, and instantly remembered the lawn wedding last night, and then strode over. "Io, I've been busy all night and was just about to go home to pick you up to go to our wedding anniversary ceremony. Why, do you look so bad?" Chapter 8. In fact, at today's anniversary ceremony, Sier Ruoyan was preparing to hold a wedding for him and give him a big surprise. The wedding with Jiang Yao last night was just an advance rehearsal. But when she thought of Jiang Yao's affectionate eyes during the rehearsal, she couldn't help it and really mistook him for Gu Qingyao and kissed him. Sier Ruoyan felt inexplicably guilty at this moment. Gu Qingyao moved her lips and raised her eyes to see Jiang Yao standing out from behind her. Jiang Yao's already handsome and flawless face seemed to have been deeply nourished by something. After a night, he looked even more energetic. "Ruoyan, didn't you promise me that you would send him for recycling today?" Facing Gu Qingyao's haggard but stubborn eyes, Sier Ruoyan frowned and said in an unhappy voice. "After all, today is a good day for us to hold the ceremony. Isn't it too cruel for you to keep bringing this up? Besides, Jiang Yao was injured and lost his memory." A big hand tugged at the corner of the woman's clothes. "Mr. Sier, the new desk has been delivered. Please come upstairs and try it out to see if you like it." Sier Ruoyan coughed quickly, as if as a warning, but the look she gave Jiang Yao was full of interest, as if she had instantly recalled something. "Io, I'll go back to the office to take care of some work. I've prepared a dress for you. Go home and try it on first, and wait for me to pick you up." Gu Qingyao looked at her hurriedly leaving figure, and a bitter feeling suddenly welled up in his nose. This was the woman he had loved for many, many years, the woman who had once risked her life to be devoted to him. "Ruoyan, don't leave." He called out to her, and it was unclear whether his dark eyes were filled with pleading or desperation, as if he was trying to grasp at a last straw. "Don't leave. Take me to the ceremony now, okay? The woman paused and looked at him hesitantly. Maybe she had seen it wrong. Why did a gleam of determination in his eyes that made her whole body tremble with pain? It was rare for Sier Ruoyan to hear him ask her to stay, and her heart softened. Thinking of what day it was today, she was about to agree. Okay, then I will. Mr. Sier, today is my last day to work with you. Jiang Yao gently squeezed her palm and looked at her with reluctance. Don't you want to sit at your new desk and reflect on my progress over the past 3 years? Countless crazy and exciting scenes instantly popped up in Sier Ruoyan's mind, and her breathing tightened. Then, without even looking up, he said perfunctorily, Io, don't you still need to change into your dress? Be obedient and go back first. I promise I'll come back to pick you up soon. She led Jiang Yao away and never looked back. Many people coming and going in the group's hall saw this scene and cast sympathetic glances at Gu Qingyao, who remained where he was. I don't know how long he stood there before he withdrew his cold gaze. The car from the experimental center was resting under the shade of the trees and had been waiting patiently for a long time. The staff member asked sympathetically, Mr. Gu, your new body is ready. Do you need to stay one more day to say goodbye to your loved one? Gu Qingyao was silent when his cell phone suddenly rang. This was a message sent by Sier Ruoyan while she was busy. Don't be angry, Yao. I will pick you up soon. You will definitely enjoy today's ceremony. You are the only husband I will ever have. From today on, we will live happily together until we grow old together. His eyelids drooped indifferently, and before turning off his phone, he liked the live broadcast of It's Her Yao's wedding last night with the account that once recorded every moment of their love. Gu Qingyao threw the phone into the trash can on the roadside, closed the car window, and moved his lips slightly. Goodbye, Sier Ruoyan. No need, let's go. At the horizon, the morning sun shines through the haze clouds. A piece of fallen leaves lifted up by the car's tail is gently buried in the soil, waiting for the arrival of new life. Chapter 9. Ha! The charming and sobbing face of a woman was reflected in the floor-to-ceiling window of the office. Sier Ruoyan had her collar open and a drop of sweat dripped from the tip of her nose. She looked at the handsome and lively face of the man on the black desk and shouted out with extreme emotion as she moved. Io, I love you. She panted, and her affectionate eyes turned cold in an instant after it was over. Jiang Yao raised his head reluctantly. Yen, can you stay with me for a while longer, okay? Sier Ruoyan glanced at her watch and refused, it's getting late. Jiang Yao saw her hurriedly fixing her hair and clothes, a trace of jealousy flashed across his eyes, and then he slowly made an unusual gesture, nodding his chin in a certain direction. But we haven't tried it on the terrace yet. Sier Ruoyan's eyes darkened. At this moment, the cell phone rang hurriedly. She glanced at it guiltily, but saw that it was not Gu Qingyao, but an unfamiliar number. She casually pressed it off and let the buttons on her chest be torn open by the man's big hands again. It was already afternoon when it ended again. This time, Sier Ruoyan ignored the man's attempts to keep her face looking cold. Io is still recovering. I will arrange a place for you to repair your data until your memory settings are restored. Don't appear in front of Io again, so as not to upset him. Jiang Yao was unwilling. Yen, can you come and accompany me more? How many times have I told you not to call me that after you get out of bed? The woman spoke in an unhappy voice, raised her hand to fasten the last button, and cast a cold gaze at him, as if she had completely forgotten the unbridled and lingering passion just now. Jiang Yao's face darkened, as if he was frightened by her attitude. She looked at his aggrieved and unwilling expression, and suddenly thought of Gu Qingyao. His tone softened. Be obedient. Once your data is restored, I won't send you to be recycled. I will set you free then. You can live freely in the future, like a real person. After all, Yao is back, so there is no need for his substitute to exist. Jiang Yao stared at her back as she left without any reluctance, and the resentment as thick as ink in his eyes gradually overflowed. He doesn't want to change any data. He wants to be her Io forever. Sier Ruoyan hurried all the way to the ceremony, with a light sweat on her back. It was already too late, so she asked the driver to pick up Gu Qingyao. She looked at her phone, which still had no new messages, feeling a little panicked. Yao must be angry and doesn't want to pay attention to her. Thinking of the pleading look in Gu Qingyao's eyes when he called her before they parted in the morning, Sier Ruoyan slapped the car seat in annoyance. There was helplessness in her eyes, and she regretted hiding in the company with Jiang Yao for the whole morning. However, when she thought that Gu Qingyao would be surprised when he saw the wedding she had carefully prepared, she relaxed a little. Relatives and friends had already arrived at the scene on the beautifully decorated lawn in front of the church. At the end of the swearing-in platform, a tall and slender figure in a brand-new suit and tuxedo stood. Sier Ruoyan's eyes lit up with joy and she quickened her pace in her high heels. "Io, the group has an emergency meeting, I'm late." The young man turned around and complained. "Sister, you are finally here. Where are Gu Qingyao and the others?" Sier Ruoyan, who was wearing a best man's tuxedo, yawned impatiently. "You put so much thought into giving him a wedding. Last night you rehearsed the wedding with the housekeeper in advance and asked me to be the best man. Yet he was so late and left everyone here on purpose. He totally ignored my parents and me. Sister, you still spoil him to death. I think he is not as good as the housekeeper." Sier Ruoyan's voice turned cold. "Shut up. Today is a Yao and I's wedding anniversary. It's also the surprise wedding I prepared for him to celebrate his awakening. You and your parents should not mention anyone else." Not wanting to pay attention to her brother's angry look, she waited for Gu Qingyao for a long time. The guests at the scene also began to whisper, and the flowers that were airlifted in overnight were about to wither. Sier Ruoyan called Gu Qingyao over and over again, but he didn't answer until the battery ran out. She felt inexplicably panicked and prepared to go home to find him. "Sister," Sier Ruoyan suddenly looked strange and stopped her. "Look at the hot searches online." Chapter 10. Sier Ruoyan was thinking of Gu Qingyao and pushed him away quickly and impatiently. When his peripheral vision swept across the image on the phone screen, his whole body froze in place. The #1 trending search at this time is a wedding that took place late at night. Her breathing became disordered for a moment, and she quickly snatched Sier Ruoyan's phone and clicked on it. The world is really a huge romance novel, filled with the regrets of unrequited love. The protagonists of that lawn wedding that was on the hot search and made people sigh and lament were clearly her and Jiang Yao. Sier Ruoyan's expression changed drastically in an instant. She realized something, and clicked on the blogger account linked below. Is it her IO? She frowned as she read the name and quickly flipped through the densely packed love countdown records of internet celebrities and bloggers. Her heartbeat became heavier and heavier, and her temples felt like being knocked by a small hammer. She was shocked and angry. Fortunately, although Jiang Yao released a lot of details about their hanging out together, he never showed their faces. Sier Ruoyan was furious and immediately notified her assistant, remove the trending search immediately and ban this account. She comforted herself that the trending search had just appeared in the morning and Gu Qingyao definitely hadn't had time to see it. Wrong. The scene of Gu Qingyao appearing in the group with a pale face in the early morning suddenly flashed before her eyes. Plus, he didn't show up in the afternoon. It felt like a crack was smashed in her heart, and freezing rain poured in instantly. Sier Ruoyan's eyes were filled with confusion and panic, and she felt cold from head to toe. He must have been mad at me because he saw the trending search. No, I have to go back and explain to Yao. She ignored all the guests and ran out in a hurry. Daughter, since he is so ignorant and wants to throw a tantrum today, let him have enough of it. You are not allowed to go find him. Sier Ruoyan supported Sier's mother's arm and snorted in agreement. That's right, he's just a sickly kid. Won't he have to rely on our family for the rest of his life? Why are you rushing to do this? When Sier Ruoyan made a desperate attempt to start her own business, the Sier family did not support her. Later, when they saw that she and Gu Qingyao had grown the company, they reluctantly agreed. When Gu Qingyao was diagnosed with a terminal illness, she emptied her family's savings and insisted on sending him for cryotherapy. The Sier family strongly opposed it at the time, but failed to stop her. Therefore, although Gu Qingyao woke up last month, the Sier family was not very happy, and even blamed him for continuing to hold Sier Ruoyan back. At this moment, seeing her mother and brother's mocking and dissatisfied faces, Sier Ruoyan finally frowned and gave them a warning. Mom, I asked you to come here today to give Yao a decent wedding and make him happy, that's all. If you let me hear you say that again, you won't have him as your son-in-law, and you won't have me as your daughter. Sier Ruoyan ignored the obstruction and was about to leave with a sullen face. Two people in white coats came towards the swearing-in platform surrounded by flowers. He asked in a heavy tone, "You are Miss Sier Ruoyan, right? As the wife of the deceased, please sign this body donation confirmation form. We will always be grateful to your husband for his voluntary contribution to the medical field." Sier Ruoyan was incredulous and laughed out of anger. "Which competitor sent you to cause trouble? How dare you say such unlucky words on my wedding anniversary? Are you looking for death?" The doctor looked at each other awkwardly, then looked at him again. "Mr. Sier, please calm down and accept my condolences. We called you at noon to inform you of Mr. Gu's time of death, but you didn't answer. Mr. Gu's body is now in our frozen truck. His only last wish was to donate his body. You can still take a last look at him." Sier Ruoyan stared at them in complete confusion. "What are you talking about? What remains?" Chapter 11. Sier's mother and Sier Ruoyan both showed expressions of disbelief, and the guests who were whispering just now suddenly became quiet, with shocked and compassionate looks in their eyes. Sier Ruoyan looked around and laughed out loud, then suddenly her face darkened. She pushed the doctor away and screamed in anger. "Today is my husband and I's wedding anniversary. He's waiting for me to pick him up at home. You'd better admit who arranged for you to come here to mess things up." She thought of the trending searches and took a deep breath. "Is it Jiang Yao? It's that blogger, it's him, right? How much money did he give you? Believe it or not, I can make you." Ruoyan. Sier's mother suddenly burst into tears. "Don't be silly, they didn't lie, my son-in-law is really gone." In the frozen car not far away, Gu Qingyao closed his eyes, his face peaceful and calm, as if he was just asleep. Sier Ruoyan walked forward with a look of disbelief on her face, just took a look, and then smiled helplessly. "Io, why are you still playing pranks on me like you did back then?" Her throat suddenly became stuck and her voice seemed to be cut off by a knife. His fingers stopped on Gu Qingyao's face, and he felt the skin under his fingers was so cold and stiff that it didn't look like that of a living person. There was a sharp roar in Sier Ruoyan's ears and her mind went blank. "Io. Io, get up quickly and stop scaring me." She suddenly lifted the white cloth and saw Gu Qingyao lying there motionless and cold, like a lifeless sculpture. "Impossible. Impossible." Sier Ruoyan was muttering something, her pupils almost bursting with blood as she examined the man's body from top to bottom. "This is fake. Maya Yao has clearly woken up. He can't be lying here alone. This is not him." The doctor couldn't bear it and stepped forward to persuade him. "Mr. Sier, Mr. Gu died voluntarily and was not in pain. Please respect his wishes and don't destroy his body." Sier Ruoyan pushed the man down heavily, and the red bloodshot in her eyes scared everyone. "Get out of here. How could a Yao die voluntarily?" He finally recovered and woke up. "The happiness we've been waiting for 5 years has just begun. You tell me, he died voluntarily? Ha 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 ha." She laughed and looked at the people around her. "Listen to how funny this is." Sier's mother's eyes changed when she looked at her, and she said with fear and caution, "Daughter." Sier Ruoyan got into the car without even looking back, and continued to call Gu Qingyao while asking someone to investigate who had pulled off this prank. The hands on the steering wheel were shaking uncontrollably. There was a busy tone on the phone, her breathing rose and fell, and she stepped on the accelerator hard. In the chaos, the phone accidentally opened a platform page. When her eyes fell on it, Sier Ruoyan's pupils shrank in shock. A like post appeared this morning on the account that Gu Qingyao used to record every moment of their love. The blogger who liked the post said, "It's her Yao." In the past 3 years, the blogger has posted stories about love, romance, breakups, pretending to have amnesia, late-night weddings. Gu Qingyao browsed through them all one by one. Sier Ruoyan felt cold all over. She withdrew her gaze and looked at the crowded traffic ahead in a daze. Her red lips moved and trembled continuously. She stepped on the accelerator and her face became wet and cold without her noticing. "Io, let me explain. Io, we love each other so much, you will definitely forgive me. You won't do anything stupid, you won't." On a busy road, there was a sharp bang sound, and a speeding black Cayenne lost control and crashed into the traffic, and caught fire. Chapter 12. Sier Ruoyan opened her eyes blurry and met the worried looks of her family members. "Daughter, you're finally awake. Do you know that I haven't closed my eyes for the past 3 days? She had a sudden thought. 3 days? Yes, I seem to have been in a car accident and was in a coma for 3 days. No, I haven't been back to explain to a Yao for 3 days. He must be very sad. I have to go back to find him. Sier Ruoyan murmured something, got off the bed and ran out anxiously barefoot, but was stopped by Sier Ruoyan with a complex and sad expression. Sister, please wake up. You have been unconscious for too long. Your brother-in-law's body has been donated according to his will. We have already held a funeral for him. Sier Ruoyan shook him off fiercely and warned in a lost voice, Io is not dead, that is not him. If you dare to curse him again, I will let you know what will happen. She ignored the obstruction and finally returned home with injuries all over her body. There was no light in the house, and she started to panic. But when she saw the familiar figure in the bedroom, her eyes suddenly lit up with surprise. She rushed over and hugged him tightly. Io, they are all liars. I knew you wouldn't be willing to abandon me. The next second, she paused, stared at the man's face in front of her, and pushed him away with force. You are not a Yao, what are you doing here? Jiang Yao fell to the ground, his tone was pitiful and low. Yen, I'm Yao, I heard that you had a car accident, I was so worried, but I couldn't find you anywhere. Don't call me that, you don't deserve it. Sier Ruoyan's mind was in chaos and burning with anger. She didn't care about him and hurriedly searched around the house, but there was no sign of Gu Qingyao in any corner. Even all his daily belongings and traces disappeared. Her heart sank, and when she saw the blood stains on the pillow, her whole body suddenly froze. Some time ago, Gu Qingyao's body had functional problems after he woke up, and it got worse and worse. He was always weak and coughing. But when did he cough up so much blood? She suddenly remembered that every night before the ceremony, he wanted her to stay and spend more time with him. While he was sleeping, she spent the whole night hanging out with that double outside. The doctor's words suddenly passed by my ears that day. Mr. Gu left voluntarily. Her Yao was so strong that he was willing to be frozen alone in a dark experimental coffin for 5 years in order to survive. He had finally been reborn, but he must have been so disappointed that he chose to leave the world without saying a word. Gu Qingyao would rather die again than live with her. The chaotic and rumbling sound in my mind came from far away and gradually turned into a whine in my ears. Sier Ruoyan couldn't bear it anymore and fell to the ground. Io, don't. Jiang Yao heard her crying and screaming in despair, and came forward and hugged her tightly with heartache. Yen, you still have me. Roll. Sier Ruoyan slapped him hard in the face with her backhand, and stepped on his neck with her high heels, with the force increasing as if out of control. The gloomy eyes stared at his painful face motionlessly. It's you let him see it on purpose. Isn't it? He knows everything that happened in the past 3 years. Tears fell heavily to the floor, but Sier Ruoyan didn't blink. With despair of destroying everything, she stepped harder and harder. I'm going to kill you, you monster. I want you to make amends to Maya Yao. Jiang Yao's distorted face turned red, and he struggled to speak. Yen, don't. Just when he thought he was really going to lose his breath, Sier Ruoyan suddenly kicked him away. Yen, he raised his head and explained with his dying breath, I didn't mean it. I just love you so much that I wanted to record everything about us. You stepped on me and it hurt so much just now. I'm so scared. Sier Ruoyan's hateful expression suddenly turned into indifference, and she looked down at him. Why are you pretending? You're just a bionic robot, how can you feel pain? Jiang Yao's face froze. Ever since he was created, he always thought of himself as a human being, and he had never heard Sier Ruoyan talk about him so bluntly. But I really love you. I was born to love you. He turned pale and wept. You are the only one in my world, Yen. I know you are sad, but you still have me. We can be like we have been for the past 3 years. Can't I continue to stay by your side? Sier Ruoyan's gaze suddenly fell on that familiar face. Io. Jiang Yao's eyes lit up with hope, and he said excitedly, it's me. Have you forgotten that you once said that you only love me? You said that you would never get tired of looking at my face, and you would love me forever. The corners of Sier Ruoyan's lips suddenly lifted, as if she had heard a joke, but her eyes were gloomy. He spoke each word with emphasis. Then you and this face that doesn't belong to you, go to hell together. Chapter 13. Yen, where are you taking me? Jiang Yao was dragged by Sier Ruoyan all the way and finally arrived at the confidential RD center of Ruoyao Group. When he saw the familiar and cold scene, a hint of extremely real fear finally emerged in his eyes. That was the instinctive fear of a bionic man. Sier Ruoyan turned on the bionic man recovery system, and her tone was cold without a trace of warmth when she gave the order. Turn off pain protection and perform primitive dissociative recovery. Jiang Yao's face turned pale for a moment. For a bionic man, this recycling method was equivalent to human torture, which would be extremely painful. He couldn't believe that the woman who had hugged him tightly and lingered with him a few days ago would treat him in such a cruel way. Jiang Yao began to tremble and broke down begging. However, Sier Ruoyan's face was as cold as a sculpture. She turned a deaf ear and continued to give instructions. After recycling, completely destroy it, and don't leave any fragments. There was extreme hatred and disgust in her cold tone. It was unclear whether she hated Jiang Yao or hated herself for creating Jiang Yao in the first place. Jiang Yao stared at her blankly, his legs went limp, and he collapsed to the ground. He looked at the woman who had given him life and was about to send him to hell, with a dazed look in his eyes, and laughed out loud after a while. Yen, you are so infatuated with him, why are you so heartless to me? Do you think Guqingyao really chose to commit suicide because he saw my account showing off our love and learned about our 3-year-long entanglement day and night? Jiang Yao smiled, and when he showed a sad expression he looked very similar to Guqingyao. Don't forget, you were the one who created me exactly according to his data. How could I not fall in love with you? Even when I was a blogger recording the little details of our love, it was something I did according to his habits. You destroyed his love, and now you want to destroy mine. Jiang Yao cried and laughed at the same time, but there was a frightening gleam of persistence in her eyes. But he and I are not exactly the same. After all, I love you 3 years more than he does. As he spoke, he showed a wronged look again, and begged frantically, just admit it, I was born for you. You like my younger and stronger body, and my healthier and more cheerful personality. I am not like him, always lifeless. More importantly, I will not die and can accompany you forever. Sier Ruoyan, you've clearly fallen in love with me over the past 3 years. If he hadn't suddenly woken up and come between us, we could have lived happily ever after. Sier Ruoyan looked down at him as he lay on the ground speaking without thinking, his miserable appearance. She clenched her lowered hands tighter and tighter until she trembled slightly. After a long while, her voice returned to its cold tone. Jiang Yao, in these 3 years, I have never loved you even for 1 day. To me, you have always been just a tool for me to relieve my longing for a Yao. Without him, you are nothing. And now, there really is no Guqingyao in the world. Sier Ruoyan endured the dull pain in her heart and said expressionlessly, start recycling. Jiang Yao trembled all over and fell into despair in an instant. There was a flurry of footsteps outside the RD center. Facing Sier Ruoyan's gloomy face, the assistant said anxiously, Boss Sier, this is bad. The news of Mr. Gu's death has been exposed. Now people are talking about it on the internet, saying that you cheated on him with an internet celebrity and forced him to death. Chapter 14. Although the account of It's Her Yao has been cancelled, as it fermented on the hot searches, some sharp-eyed netizens recognized it. How come this loyal love blogger looks exactly like Ms. Sier's husband? Fuck. The bride at the late-night wedding seems to be Mr. Sier from Ruoyao Group. So Sier Ruoyan pretended to be affectionate on the surface, but secretly she had found a male mistress who looked exactly like her and had been cheating on her for 3 years. No wonder this blogger posts aggrieved posts every day, saying that he loves her but cannot show it in public. It turns out that she is really a mistress. More and more netizens dug out the truth, and those fans who were originally regretting the regretful breakup were dumbfounded. They unfollowed the couple and some even cursed. Not only did Sier Ruoyan's image as a loving wife collapse, her emotional scandal also affected the company's public opinion. Soon, another shocking news broke on the internet. It is terrifying to think about it. The male mistress who forced Mr. Gu to death was not a substitute, but an illegally produced bionic man. As soon as this news came out, it instantly ignited all hot searches and news. The public relations department of Ruoyao Group was in a state of panic. The executives were on call 24 hours a day. Not only did they have to fend off countless reporters' visits, but they also had to find ways to stabilize shareholders. At this time, someone noticed, "Where is Mr. Sier? Why is Mr. Sier gone?" Sier Ruoyan, who was surrounded by negative public opinion, was lying on the bed where Gu Qingyao had slept. In the dark room, she was flipping through the comments on the internet that angrily scolded scumbag women and cheap men, her lips looking pale. "It's not because I can't bear the insults. But these comments are all correct. 3 years ago, because she missed Gu Qingyao too much, she created Jiang Yao out of selfish desires. She tried to cover up her mistake by getting entangled with the bionic man day and night, pouring all her emotions on him. So much so that later, when a Yao finally woke up, she was still addicted and went on affairs behind his back again and again. Her Yao is so smart and sensitive, how could he not notice? When he thought about the fact that Gu Qingyao had realized the truth as soon as he woke up and had given her chances again and again, until he realized that Sier Ruoyan 5 years later was no longer the person who had her heart and eyes entirely devoted to him, he fell into great despair and finally chose to end his life with a weak and decayed body. Sier Ruoyan's heart felt numb from the pain as if it was being torn apart, and hot flesh and blood gushed out until coldness and emptiness spread throughout her body. There was a sudden knock on the door. She was shocked and opened her eyes to look over. A Yao is back. Sier Ruoyan opened the door and the smile on her face froze. At the door, the police showed their ID and said, "Mr. Sier, you are involved in the illegal production of bionic people. Please come with us." 1 year later. Outside the medical laboratory, a thin figure pushed the door open and walked in. When he saw the news playing on the computer screen, he paused silently. Last quarter, Ruoyao Group fell into a major crisis of broken capital chain. Currently, the president Sier Ruoyan has been released from prison. Yesterday, she issued a statement saying that she would not interrupt the research and development of bionic robots, claiming that this project also embodied the hard work of her late husband. The screen suddenly went black. Gu Qingyao mercilessly turned off the computer and placed the lunchbox in front of the woman in white. "Professor Cheng, it's not good to slack off at work. Be careful or I'll complain to the dean." The woman nodded obediently immediately, opened the lunchbox, saw the black mass of food inside, and started eating silently without changing her expression. Gu Qingyao's new face was faintly reflected on the screen. He looked at Cheng Ying swallowing it with difficulty and smiled. "Forget it, I'm just practicing my hand movements, so don't eat if you can't eat it." Cheng Ying said nothing until he finished eating, then he spoke in a soft voice. "It's improved, and it's delicious." Gu Qingyao's eyebrows curved into a smile instantly. Professor Cheng is really good at praising people. "Well, actually, I also feel that I have made progress. At least I am better than last month. Now I can at least cook it well." Cheng Ying looked at the smile in his eyes that didn't seem fake, and her slightly worried heart finally calmed down. Gu Qingyao knew what she was worried about. Thinking of the scene in the news just now, he put away his smile and said in a gentle voice, "I have now started a hard-earned new life. The people and things in the past are like the experience of my previous life to me. I really don't care anymore." He and Cheng Ying have known each other for 6 years. At that time, Cheng Ying, as a research professor of the cryotherapy project, stayed by his frozen coffin for 5 years until he woke up and recovered. In the words of the director of the experimental center, Cheng Ying is a genius with a solitary temperament. Apart from her research project and her patients, or treatment subjects, Cheng Ying has no interest in anyone or anything in the outside world. After Gu Qingyao woke up, he thought he would never have the chance to deal with this genius professor again. However, a year ago, when his body showed signs of decay and he secretly faked his death and replaced his body with a new one, Cheng Ying rushed back from a research institute abroad, looking at him with determination on her beautiful face. "You are my patient. Don't worry. I won't let anything happen to you." Chapter 15. The process of adapting to the new body was not easy. With heart rejection, organ dysfunction, nervous system shock and so on, Gu Qingyao almost survived a near-death experience in those few short months. Fortunately, Cheng Ying is here. In short, with her dedicated help, Gu Qingyao regained his new life. After a year-long rehabilitation period, he has now adapted to this body. "Of course, I like it very much." A cold face with long eyes was reflected on the dim screen. At first glance, he seemed unapproachable and distant, but when he smiled slightly, people felt like they were bathed in a spring breeze and the ice and snow were beginning to melt. Gu Qingyao withdrew his gaze from his own face, met Qing Ying's still worried look, and explained helplessly. I've died twice. Maybe my heart can't help but feel sorry for me. Now it really can't hold all those love affairs anymore. As long as I, its owner, am alive, that's enough. In fact, when he heard the news about Sier Ruoyan after a long time, he was calmer and more composed than he had imagined, without any disturbance at all. Humans are really strange creatures. He was so disheartened at the time that he was determined to get a new body at all costs. Gu Qingyao was even prepared to never open his eyes again, just to leave that person completely. However, despair often brings new life. After going through the difficult and painful adaptation process, once he was freed from the deep emotions of the past, he realized how stupid he had been. I once loved someone madly, thinking that I must be with that person for the rest of my life, and all my thoughts and feelings were easily controlled by the other person. Now it seems that no matter how strong the love and hate are, they are nothing but fleeting clouds in the face of time and life and death. Seeing that he looked calm and didn't seem forced, Qing Ying finally smiled. Well, I have died with you twice, but I didn't let you die either time. As for his past, Qing Ying was indeed a witness from beginning to end. 6 years ago, Sier Ruoyan spent all her family wealth and was deeply in love. 5 years later, she cheated on her husband and left the place in a mess. Whether then or now, Qing Ying always watched silently and never expressed any comments. This is good, because the last thing Gu Qingyao wants is sympathy. In front of this young, stubborn, and talented professor, he could be a patient with peace of mind, without being afraid of his occasional weakness and loss of composure. But, Professor Cheng, I came here today because I actually have something to discuss with you. Gu Qingyao met her gaze, his eyes firm. I heard from the dean that you want to leave the experimental center and start developing in the direction of bionic biology. To be honest, this was also my major during my graduate studies. If I want to start a business again, Professor Cheng, are you willing to cooperate with me? He was a little nervous and prepared to be rejected. But it doesn't matter. What Gu Qingyao lacks the most now is time and determination. He secretly decided that if he had even 1% of willingness, he would firmly grasp the opportunity to cooperate with Qing Ying. Qingyao, Qing Ying seemed to have expected his invitation. Her slender fingertips pushed down her frameless glasses without surprise. Can I consider it? Gu Qingyao showed surprise, of course. After he finished his routine physical examination at the experimental center, Qing Ying looked at the time and said, "Let me take you there. It's time to get off work." In fact, Gu Qingyao always felt that Qing Ying was not as lonely and cold as others said. Although she acts too rationally and rigidly, she actually has her own principles and boundaries. So, he, the patient, exists within her boundaries. In the co-pilot seat, Gu Qingyao was silently thinking about how to convince her to join him. During this year, he did more than just adapt to his body. He also returned to his old profession. Apart from rehabilitation and rest, he studied and researched current market trends day and night. This time, he did not start a business on impulse, but had made sufficient preparations, and all he needed was the right time. The car stopped by the roadside. Gu Qingyao absent-mindedly smelled the aroma of sugar-roasted chestnuts outside the window, and his stomach suddenly growled. He exchanged an awkward look with Qing Ying. The woman's eyes were indifferent, and then she pushed the door and got out of the car. Gu Qingyao followed her, and she had already bought a bag of sugar-roasted chestnuts and handed it to him. You bring food to me, a doctor, but you, as a patient, are hungry. Qing Ying looked at him helplessly. You really are the patient I am most worried about in my career. Gu Qingyao ate the chestnuts while they were still hot and smiled. After all, I am the focus of Professor Cheng's attention. Qing Ying had never been interested in this kind of roadside snack, but when she saw him eating with such satisfaction, her eyes softened and she was about to say something. Professor Cheng. It's really you. A figure ran over and was very excited after recognizing Qing Ying. Do you still remember me? I was a student who attended your lecture and answered several of your questions at that time. My name is Sier Ruoyan. Of course Qing Ying didn't remember. She nodded coldly and said nothing. Gu Qingyao beside him, however, felt a slight tightening in his eyes. He lowered his eyes, chewed the chestnuts slowly, and listened to Sier Ruoyan, his former brother-in-law, trying to get close to Cheng-Ying with an admiring look on his face. When Sier Ruoyan scratched his head and asked for a private contact so that he could ask questions, Cheng-Ying glanced at Gu Qingyao, who was silently eating chestnuts, and refused without any hesitation. "Sorry, we have to go." Sier Ruoyan was disappointed, and also looked at the man next to her, and asked curiously, "Professor Cheng, is this your boyfriend?" "It's none of your business. I am Professor Cheng's patient." They both spoke at the same time. When he finished speaking, Gu Qingyao met Cheng-Ying's gaze, which had gradually faded. Sier Ruoyan was stunned. It turned out that he was just a patient. He said, "Professor Cheng, who is young, cool and outstanding, has many suitors, but she has never been tempted by any worldly desire. She is like a flower on the mountain that no one dares to pick. How could she suddenly have a boyfriend?" He calmed down and said goodbye to Cheng-Ying openly. "I had just taken a few steps when I suddenly felt something was wrong." "Why?" The voice of that man just now sounded strangely familiar, as if I've heard it somewhere before. Chapter 16. Back in the car, Gu Qingyao silently observed Cheng-Ying's expression, wondering why she suddenly became unhappy. "However, I didn't expect to meet Sier Ruoyan today." "So Sier Ruoyan likes Cheng-Ying?" "Yes, in the eyes of a male college student who just graduated like him, Cheng-Ying completely fits the image of a certain kind of aloof goddess." "I've thought about it." Gu Qingyao was lost in thought, and when he heard Cheng-Ying speak suddenly, his heart tightened. Cheng-Ying said in a serious tone, "I have decided to cooperate with you." He was stunned for a few seconds before asking in disbelief, "Really? I thought you would think about it for a long time." "I've been thinking about it for 2 hours." "Isn't that long enough?" The woman took in his surprised smile, raised her eyebrows, and gave her own legitimate reasons. "After all, I am a responsible doctor, and Mr. Gu, you are obviously an irresponsible patient. I can only choose to be responsible to the end." The other side. After Sier Ruoyan finished playing games with his classmates, he knocked on the door while carrying a bunch of things. "Mom asked me to bring you something. It's so heavy." "Sister, you." When he saw the dark and thin face of the woman at the door, his complaining words came to an abrupt end. "It's been a year." Every time he came here, Sier Ruoyan felt that this house was lifeless. Sier Ruoyan didn't even turn on the lights, holding the car keys in her hand, as if she was preparing to go out. "It's so late, where are you going, sister?" Sier Ruoyan did not answer, but carefully picked up a bouquet of flowers that she had arranged herself, and walked out with her eyelids drooping. Sier Ruoyan quickly chased after her and called out to her. "Are you going to the cemetery again?" He frowned, feeling a sense of mockery and disdain in his heart, but he dared not show it on his face. He just advised her, "It's been a year since my brother-in-law left. Sister, it's time for you to move on. Do you know how worried your parents are about you? And the group, I heard that it has problems with its capital chain. And the confidentiality patent is about to expire." Sier Ruoyan said with distressed tone, "Sister, this is the hard work you put into building this company. Are you willing to let the group collapse like this? You really should cheer up. Are you done?" The woman carefully arranged the bouquet of flowers, her dark eyes suddenly looked over, and Sier Ruoyan paused. "Io likes fresh roses, and I don't want him to wait." Sier Ruoyan suddenly felt a little cold on his back and shivered all over. That's all. Thinking of the people he met today, he mustered up the courage to speak again. "By the way, since the group's patent is about to expire, can you invite Cheng-Ying, a visiting professor at our school, to work together to develop new projects? She's a genius doctor and a big shot in the industry." I don't have any other intentions, I'm just considering the group." The thin figure of the woman had already walked away, and suddenly she stopped. Cheng-Ying. This name is familiar. She was the doctor who led the cryotherapy experiment and saved Gu Qingyao. A hint of emotion finally appeared in Sier Ruoyan's calm eyes. "It was late at night when we arrived at the cemetery. She was used to coming here at this time. Even though her husband's body was not buried in this cemetery, it was the only place where Sier Ruoyan could accompany him. In the cool night breeze, the rose lace is the black and white photo of a smiling man on the tombstone." The woman carefully brushed away the dust on the photo with her fingers and looked at him deeply. "Those people advised me to get out of here early. Io, don't you think they are ridiculous? A genuine smile appeared on Sier Ruoyan's gloomy and pale face. Why do you want to come out? I'll stay here with you forever, isn't that great? Io, don't be afraid. Even if you have a terminal illness, I can cure you. I will do whatever it takes to make you wake up and come back to me. It started to drizzle, wetting the rose petals. Sier Ruoyan's long hair on her shoulders was also soaked, but she was unaware and stood there for an unknown amount of time before leaving reluctantly. She murmured to herself, Io, I will come to accompany you tomorrow. By the way, there is a doctor named Cheng Ying, she is a genius, she will definitely be able to cure you. She quickened her pace down the mountain, but a slender figure passed by among the tombstones not far away. Sier Ruoyan's eyes trembled, and she followed subconsciously. Io. She was so excited and hurried, muttering to herself, that she missed a step in the rain and tumbled down the long and steep stairs of the cemetery. It was unknown how long it had been before Sier Ruoyan managed to stand up, enduring the pain. There was a buzzing sound in her head. Why am I here? It took her a long while to remember that she had come to the cemetery again tonight to look after Qingyao. Limping back to the car, her forehead tightened, she pulled out a few medicine bottles and swallowed many pills without even looking at them. Sier Ruoyan gasped for breath, and the pain seemed to be relieved for a moment, and she closed her eyes in emptiness. Yen, how did you fall like this? You were not careful at all. Next time if you don't take care of yourself like this, I will be angry. Ruoyan, my wife, I miss you so much. She heard his voice many times in her ears, but she never opened her eyes. Because she knew that once she regained consciousness, Qingyao would not appear even once in her dreams. The ringing of the cell phone broke the silence of the night. Sier Ruoyan opened her eyes and answered the phone numbly. Hello. Is this Mr. Sier? Your husband got in trouble with me and said he wanted to find you. She thought she was hallucinating again, her brows turned cold, and she was about to hang up. By the way, his name is Qingyao, right? Sier Ruoyan's pupils trembled violently. Chapter 17. In the neon-lit nightclub, the woman's footsteps were fast. Jiang Yao was in a state of disgrace, being held by several people with ill intentions. He finally couldn't help crying out in grievance when the people arrived. Yen, I knew you would come. Water was still dripping from the ends of Sier Ruoyan's hair at the corners of her eyes, and her wet, dark black hair made her thin face look even paler. The moment she saw the familiar figure of the men from afar, she felt a little dazed and excited. It was not until Jiang Yao's voice for help was heard that she suddenly became quiet and her eyes gradually turned cold. The boss of the nightclub said in a sinister tone, "This man worked here and cheated me of a large sum of money and wanted to run away. Boss Sier, why don't you think highly of your pretty boy? Are you willing to let him mess around like this?" Sier Ruoyan interrupted coldly, "I have nothing to do with him." Jiang Yao stared at her with red eyes. Yen, I am your Yao. I know you are still angry with me, but can you really bear to watch me being bullied and humiliated by them? A year ago, Sier Ruoyan wanted to send him for compulsory recycling, but she encountered a public opinion crisis and was unable to take care of herself, so Jiang Yao took advantage of the chaos to escape. Later, she was investigated and sentenced for illegally producing bionic humans. However, before going to prison, she suddenly found him and destroyed his face without saying a word. No matter how Jiang Yao begged, it was useless. The pain of disfiguring his face made Jiang Yao regret for the first time having the human sense of pain. Since he has been exposed and sentenced, Sier Ruoyan can no longer activate the recycling system to kill him without authorization, otherwise the group will be completely banned. But Jiang Yao still remembers her chilling look at that time. You want to stay? That's fine. I can't destroy you, but I can definitely make you, a monster, live a life worse than death. Jiang Yao was used to staying by her side and had no ability to make a living. After escaping again, he did not dare to reveal his identity as a bionic man. He also wanted to go back to his old job as an internet celebrity blogger, but he was quickly recognized by netizens and scolded. As a last resort, he had to choose to do shady underground work to make some quick money. Unexpectedly, he offended someone tonight. He had no choice but to think of Sier Ruoyan. Seeing that she really appeared, the long-lost hope and a hint of dark madness rekindled in his eyes. In the end, Sier Ruoyan rescued him. Jiang Yao stared at the woman he hadn't seen for a long time, and burst into laughter. I knew you wouldn't ignore me. Yen Yen, you've become much thinner. Why are there so many medicines in this car? Are you sick? Sier Ruoyan's eyes were indifferent and she interrupted his distressed tone. Don't look for me again in the future. A Yao will be unhappy if he knows. Jiang Yao was silent for a moment and wanted to come over and hug her. Yen Yen, don't you understand? He is already dead. But it doesn't matter, you still have me. His hands wandered back and forth on the woman's body, reaching into her clothes, and his low voice was filled with desire. Yen Yen, please let me come back to you. It's okay even if you treat me as him, as long as I can accompany you day and night like before. Have you forgotten how happy we were before? I was born for you, and every bit of us fits so perfectly. In the dim night, Sier Ruoyan suddenly smiled. Jiang Yao's eyes lit up with surprise and hope. Yen Yen, I haven't seen you smile for a long, long time. It has been a year, and he doesn't want to live the hard life of wandering anymore, and can't wait to get back to her. However, as Sier Ruoyan smiled, her eyes became more and more dazed. He muttered to himself in a hoarse voice, how could I be so stupid at that time? How could I treat you as a Yao's substitute? Even if you look exactly like him, you are not him at all and have never been worthy of him. What Sier Ruoyan has always loved is Gu Qingyao's flexible yet unyielding sincere soul. This monster with only an empty shell is not worthy of insulting him with a Yao's appearance. Sier Ruoyan. Seeing that the seduction failed, Jiang Yao's expression revealed a dark meaning, and he looked at her with great resentment. If you don't come back to me, I will have to continue to degenerate in this body. I was beaten this time, but who knows what will happen next time. You must be reluctant, right? He thought that Sier Ruoyan would go crazy and punish him after hearing this. But it doesn't matter. Ordinary pain is nothing to him. Her touch is a life-saving medicine to him. It is a desire that comes from his genes. Unexpectedly, Sier Ruoyan just raised her eyelids and looked at Jiang Yao deeply. He uttered in submission, I promise you. Chapter 18. Gu Qingyao's company was registered 2 months ago. After Cheng Ying chose to join the technical partnership, the two began to recruit people and prepare for next month's patent auction. The day finally arrived. Gu Qingyao changed into a white suit and looked at Cheng Ying before entering the venue. Cheng Ying's clear eyes were full of encouragement. Don't worry, you are my partner Gu Yuzheng now, no one will recognize you. He smiled and nodded, then took the lead in striding into the venue. As Cheng Ying was a rare genius doctor in the industry, naturally many people lined up to get close to her and inquire about her information, and he didn't want to be surrounded by them. Cheng Ying dealt with it for a while and was about to go in when a voice behind her called her. Professor Cheng. Sier Ruoyan's face was gloomy and haggard. Compared with Cheng Ying's previous impression, she had indeed lost a lot of weight. She recognized Cheng Ying and stepped forward quickly. Professor Cheng, I have been looking for opportunities to communicate with you, but you have declined. It seems that you have accepted the olive branch from others. Cheng Ying looked cold, but did not deny it. After her brother's reminder last time, Sier Ruoyan did want to recruit her to the group, but the more important reason for her to find Cheng Ying was that she wanted to ask about the cryotherapy treatment that year. There was no reason. Even if she could find someone who had just a little bit of connection with Gu Qingyao, she couldn't help but want to ask more about him. Being treated coldly by Cheng Ying, Sier Ruoyan just politely reminded, by the way, no matter who Professor Cheng cooperates with, our Ruoyao group is determined to win today's patent auction. These bionic creature and robot patents were originally those that had expired in the group. Today was just a formality and they would eventually return to her hands. The auction began, and Sier Ruoyan returned to her seat, tapping the table absent-mindedly. When I looked up, I saw the man in the white suit sitting next to Cheng Ying. The man had an unfamiliar face and his eyes were rather cold. When he lowered his head and whispered with Cheng Ying, the curve of his lips made her pupils freeze. Sister, why didn't you answer my call? Sier Ruoyan came hurriedly with a complaint in his voice. As soon as he sat down, he saw Cheng Ying not far away. Before the attentive smile on her face could rise, she couldn't help but frown when she saw the man next to her. Why is Professor Cheng with him again? Didn't he say he was a patient? Sier Ruoyan came back to her senses. Do you know him? Sier Ruoyan curled his lips and said, I don't know him. I saw him with Professor Cheng last time. He said he was her patient. Oh, a patient would come to such an important occasion. Her patients. Sier Ruoyan repeated it in her mouth and looked at the men again. However, an unexpected situation occurred in the patent auction at this time. Most of the key patents when the business was first started were obtained by Gu Qingyao. According to regulations, he has the right of first refusal within 1 year after the patent expires. At this moment, in the auction, an unknown small startup company represented by Cheng Ying submitted this priority application and won all the key patents in one fell swoop. Even Sier Ruoyan was dumbfounded, but his point was, "Sister, didn't I ask you to win over Professor Cheng? Why is she competing with you for the patent now?" Everyone present was shocked and talked about it, but Sier Ruoyan ignored them. She suddenly stood up and stood in front of them, staring at the tall man next to Cheng Ying. She gritted her teeth and said, "Cheng Ying, is a Yao not dead? Where did you hide him? How do you have his authorization?" Chapter 19. This was the first time that Gu Qingyao had met Sier Ruoyan face to face since his rebirth. His hanging fingers trembled slightly and were grasped by Cheng Ying in time. The warmth from her soft palm quickly calmed him down, and he only heard her calm and distant voice, "Mr. Sier, the right of first refusal was indeed authorized to me by Mr. Gu before his death in return for my 5 years of treatment. He is a kind person. As a doctor, I don't need anything in return, but I can't bear to reject his kindness." Sier Ruoyan quickly caught up, grabbed Sier Ruoyan's arm and whispered, "Sister, what are you talking about? Wake up. Professor Cheng, I'm sorry, but my sister actually wants to work with you, with the two of you to jointly develop a new project." Facing Sier Ruoyan's expectant gaze, Cheng Ying said mercilessly, "Thank you, we refuse." After saying that, she and Gu Qingyao strode away together. The two gazes behind me felt like thorns in my back. It was not until they reached the underground parking lot that Gu Qingyao suddenly let go of Cheng Ying's hand and his breathing calmed down. He thought of Sier Ruoyan who had just stood in front of him. She was so thin that he could hardly recognize her. Her face was sickly pale, and her eyes were as dark as dead water. There were faint red bloodshot under her eyes, which made people dare not look directly at her. She is completely different from the beautiful girl she was a year ago. Throw it away after use. Is this how Mr. Gu treats me, his doctor and partner? Cheng Ying spoke suddenly, a hint of dissatisfaction deliberately flashed in her clear eyes, and the corners of her lips were slightly pursed. Or, you haven't let her go at all? Gu Qingyao met her gaze, shook his head and explained, "I'm just a little nervous. Don't get me wrong, I'm not nervous because of her. Mainly, this is my first official appearance with my current identity, and it went more smoothly than I thought. I'm very happy, but also a little confused. I was at a loss just now, really." Seeing Sier Ruoyan, he was surprised that she had become like this, and there was no more emotion in his heart. "This is the truth." Cheng Ying then hummed softly, and the corners of her lips on her pretty face rose slightly again. She drove the car over and Gu Qingyao stood there waiting. Thinking of the urgent look Sier Ruoyan had given him just now, and what Sier Ruoyan had said to wake her up, he couldn't help but frown. However, she definitely couldn't recognize him. Or rather, no one could recognize him, so there was nothing to worry about. He is now Gu Yuzheng. Suddenly, the elevator in front dinged and someone got off. The elevator doors slowly opened to both sides, revealing a figure. Gu Qingyao's breathing suddenly tightened when he saw the face that looked exactly like his own for the first time in a long time. I didn't expect Jiang Yao to appear here. However, the other party just glanced at him quickly and then hurried away as if looking for someone. Passing by a luxury car not far away, Jiang Yao suddenly stopped and let out an incredible growl. "You, who are you? Get out here." He was seen dragging and tugging a frightened young man out of the car. The two soon started to push and shove each other, but what was quite shocking was that they looked exactly the same. Just like a pair of twin brothers. Gu Qingyao stared at the scene and suddenly cold sweat broke out on his back. "Sir, do you know my husband?" The familiar voice coming from behind him at a close distance made his body suddenly stiffen. Chapter 20. Fortunately, at this moment, Cheng Ying's car arrived in time. She quickly got out of the car to help Gu Qingyao open the door, and when she saw the couple of men, the bionic men, she frowned with a hint of disgust. Gu Qingyao turned around and said calmly, "Sorry, I don't know him. He nodded slightly to Sier Ruoyan and got in the car. Sier Ruoyan looked at Cheng Ying's considerate and gentle actions and quickly frowned. Professor Cheng, who is this? Cheng Ying said calmly, I forgot to introduce him. He is Mr. Gu, my current boss. Sier Ruoyan's chest heaved violently. She stared blankly at the figure in the car window, but she could not see anything wrong on that face. His last name is Gu too. Maybe it's just a coincidence. She had clearly never seen this man before. Yen. Who is he and why does he look like me? The one who quickly rushed forward and hugged Sier Ruoyan was not Jiang Yao, but the young man who was in the car just now. Sier Ruoyan subconsciously wanted to push him away, but she held back and patted his back with a seemingly pitying gesture, expressionless. Don't worry, he's just your stand-in. Jiang Yao's face was full of disbelief, and he shouted, No, he is the substitute, Yen. I am Yura Yao. The young man who was hugging Sier Ruoyan tightly refused to give in. Yen, I don't want to see him again. Isn't it enough for you to have me? How can you create a fake substitute? How can you create a fake double? How can you create a fake double? The young man's eyes flashed, and the strange sound that was stuck in his throat and kept coming out suddenly echoed in the huge parking lot. It's like some kind of misexecuted procedure. Cheng Ying's car had already driven out. Gu Qingyao got goosebumps all over his body when he heard the strange and distorted aftertaste. He couldn't help but look back, but he met Sier Ruoyan's gaze. He turned his head quickly, still feeling frightened. Is she crazy? He could have predicted that Sier Ruoyan had not been willing to take Jiang Yao back after he faked his death. But now, another android has appeared. What's going on? Moreover, this Gu Qingyao is clearly younger than Jiang Yao's version, and more like the 18 or 19-year-old Gu Qingyao when the two first fell in love. But it's funny when you think about it. Once upon a time, I was standing in Jiang Yao's current position, watching in pain as Sier Ruoyan was entangled in love with another me in the world. Now, the person who was hysterically catching the adulterer was Jiang Yao. I don't know how he felt when he saw the new substitute appear. Cheng Ying replied calmly, she is very crazy. Let's stay away from her in the future to avoid being infected. With a criminal record already in place, Sier Ruoyan began illegally creating bionic people, and even paraded the bionic people with flaws around the market. This is more than crazy. Parking lot, Sier Ruoyan did not look away until the car was no longer visible. She threw the twisted and stuck man hard into the trunk and told him to shut up, with disgust and disappointment in her eyes. You don't deserve it. You are not a Yao at all. The shell is not similar. In the evening, Jiang Yao found her again in the group, panting and looking disappointed. Sier Ruoyan swallowed a handful of pills and looked at him expressionlessly. Didn't I ask you to stay at home and take care of a Yao? He's sick and needs someone to take good care of him. What are you doing here? Jiang Yao collapsed and revealed, Yen, you are the one who is sick. Although he returned to her as he wished during this period, he increasingly felt that something was wrong with her mental state and behavior. Until yesterday, he accidentally learned that Sier Ruoyan had created a new bionic man without telling anyone. Jiang Yao was completely panicked. Although the bionic man had a flaw and had been recycled, Jiang Yao still didn't dare to feel at ease. Yen, I know you are sick and feel very uncomfortable. Why don't you refresh my memory data and treat me as him, so that we can start over? I am willing to forget everything that happened before, and from now on, I will completely become your Gu Qingyao. As he spoke, he slowly unbuttoned his clothes and moved closer to Sier Ruoyan. His fingers touched her with trembling and eagerness. She did not refuse this time. Jiang Yao was overjoyed and excitement immediately appeared on her face. Yen, no matter who I am, I will make you happy, just like before. Before he finished speaking, he saw the woman's dead eyes in the dim light. Jiang Yao paused, and the next second, he saw dozens of identical Gu Qingyao walking out of the office behind her. Soon, a man's uncontrolled and terrifying roar suddenly rang out in the empty and silent corridor. Sier Ruoyan looked at his distorted expression and smiled with satisfaction and emptiness. Chapter 21. The new company is led by big names like Cheng Ying, and a new project team was quickly established, which is currently attracting much attention in the field of bionic biological research and development. This cutting-edge technology will be of great help to trauma repair, genetic research, precision medicine, etc. Of course, everything must be based on scientific research and manufacturing within the scope permitted by law. Gu Qingyao quietly watched Cheng Ying finish the meeting with the team members and delivered the lunch boxes in time after the meeting. Cheng Ying glanced at him and pretended to be surprised. "What delicious food have you made again? How can you let Boss Gu work so hard?" Inside is a whole chocolate cake, which is delicate and small, and exudes fragrance. It can be seen that the person who made it put a lot of effort into it. Gu Qingyao liked to see the aloof genius professor showing this rare silly expression, and laughed. "Happy birthday, Professor Cheng." Cheng Ying was obviously very surprised. Her long eyelashes fluttered, and she looked up at him after a long while. "How did you know today is my birthday?" She hasn't celebrated her birthday in many years since her parents passed away, and she even forgot that it was today. Gu Qingyao smiled and lit the candles, saying mysteriously, "You told me yourself." "When will I?" The words paused, and Cheng Ying suddenly remembered. During the 5 years she stayed by the frozen experimental coffin, she would often talk to him in order to cooperate with the experiments. Even though he can't hear, language stimulation of brain waves is part of the experiment. Once she really didn't know what to say, so she carefully introduced her situation. "Can you hear it?" Cheng Ying was surprised and excited. Gu Qingyao nodded, then shook his head. "I guess so. In fact, I wouldn't be conscious even if I heard it at that time, but after waking up, many things that happened during the frozen period or words I heard would suddenly pop up in my mind from time to time." Cheng Ying looked at him with eyes that became brighter and brighter, and suddenly realized that the experiment that year might have made a major progress that had not been noticed. She suddenly reached out and hugged the person in front of her. I have to go back to the lab. I can eat the cake when I get back." Gu Qingyao was hugged by her unexpectedly. His nose was enveloped by the cold, snow-like scent of the woman, and he stared blankly at her back as she quickly left. Suddenly, he discovered that Cheng Ying's earlobes, which were pretending to be calm, had turned red. Outside the company, Sier Ruoyan hid in the dark, watching Cheng Ying hurriedly leave, with a hint of shock in his eyes. He originally just wanted to find out the true relationship between Cheng Ying and the men, so he found a way to follow them for a few days. But today, he learned an extremely horrifying truth. Gu Qingyao is most likely not dead. He might be the Mr. Gu who always appears next to Cheng Ying, Gu Yuzheng. Sier Ruoyan felt horrified, but he also felt that the more impossible the guess was, the more likely it was to be the truth. Sier family. Messages keep popping up on my phone, from work, family, friends. Most of the comments came from the group's senior executives and shareholders, urging Sier Ruoyan to resolve the current precarious situation as soon as possible. The faint blue light reflected into the woman's drunken eyes, and was quickly thrown away by her. Sier Ruoyan knocked on the door for a long time but no one answered, so he had no choice but to call a locksmith. As soon as he entered the room, the strong and unpleasant smell of alcohol hit him in the face. He exclaimed, "Sister, why did you drink so much again? I was worried that something might happen to you." Sier Ruoyan's thin figure slumped on the ground like a piece of rag, her eyes half opened and then closed again. During this period of time, she created many yaos, but finally she had to admit a fact. No matter how accurate the data or how sophisticated the technology, it is impossible to replicate even 1/10,000th of what he is like in her heart. Gu Qingyao has left her for more than a year. Now she just wants to indulge in the fantasy of drugs and alcohol and dream about him again. "But, you are so cruel. You won't come even once." Seeing his sister like this, Sier Ruoyan felt sad and angry, and simply yelled. "I really don't understand, is Gu Qingyao really that good? I think he is a liar who has fooled everyone. He is not dead at all. He just changed his appearance and abandoned you to find another woman. He just wants you to feel guilty for the rest of your life. Wake up." Chapter 22. Looking at his sister's back as she stumbled out, Sier Ruoyan originally wanted to follow her. Suddenly, he heard some faint noise coming from a locked room at the end of the corridor. Thinking about the fact that Jiang Yao, the bionic man who had been pestering Sier Ruoyan, had not appeared recently, but with Sier Ruoyan's personality, it was impossible for her to send him away for recycling easily now. She wouldn't let him have it that easy. Sier Ruoyan rolled his eyes and went over to knock on the door. "Jiang Yao, are you in there?" "I'm Sier Ruoyan." Gu Qingyao was busy in the company until very late before he raised his head and stretched. I checked my phone and found that Cheng Ying hadn't come back yet. Mr. Gu, Ruoyao Group has sent someone to discuss the transfer of patented technology in detail. They said they will wait for you at the rooftop cafe. There is indeed a cafe on the rooftop of this building, but how can we drink coffee there so late? Gu Qingyao called Cheng Ying while getting in the elevator, but the signal was bad and he hung up before the call was connected. The rooftop was completely dark, the cafe was closed, and a night light was the only source of light. Gu Qingyao suddenly felt something was wrong and immediately turned around and walked back. "Io." A slender figure walked out of the darkness, accompanied by a hoarse, light voice. Gu Qingyao shuddered all over. When he heard the woman calling him like this again, he felt a strange feeling of extreme resistance all over his body. Meeting Sier Ruoyan's red yet cold eyes, Gu Qingyao was extremely sure at just one glance. She found out. Although he didn't know how she noticed the clues, Gu Qingyao only knew one thing, that is he would never admit it. He looked alert, with his hands behind his back, calling Cheng Ying. The next moment, the phone was snatched away by the woman. Gu Qingyao looked over warily, but Sier Ruoyan just wanted to hold his hand. Her sunken, haggard eyes were red as if blood was oozing out of them, and she stared at him intently. "Io, it's you. I knew you weren't dead. You're back." She touched his face carefully with her cold fingers and asked hoarsely, "You must have suffered a lot to adapt to your current body, right? Was it very hard?" Sier Ruoyan actually guessed it. Gu Qingyao was breathing heavily, his pupils contracted before she hugged him, and he pushed her away violently. "Boss Sier, those people outside are saying that you have mental problems, but I don't believe it." He stepped away calmly. "Now that I have seen it with my own eyes, judging by the level of nonsense you are talking about, I think you are really seriously ill." Sier Ruoyan looked at him steadily and smiled. Back then, Professor Cheng mentioned several extreme solutions to deal with the body's decline after waking up from freezing. The riskiest of all is getting a new body. Gu Qingyao suppressed the discomfort in his heart and looked at her quietly. "In fact, I have always known that you are not dead. Io, I am the person who knows you best in this world. You will not choose to die for a betrayed love. It is not worth it for you. You just don't want me anymore. That's why you would rather fake your death and leave, taking the risk and enduring the pain to be reborn in a new body. You just don't want to forgive me." In the night wind, the woman's voice was filled with sad and powerless sobs. "I love you. I have always loved you. During those 5 years, I had exhausted all hope and ended up falling into depravity and hanging out with a substitute. But I never thought of him as you. He was just a tool." Gu Qingyao couldn't listen any longer and interrupted coldly. "Mr. Sier, you are so ridiculous. If your late husband heard these words, he would probably be so angry that he would crawl out of his grave and take you away." His eyes were cold, and his facial features and figure were completely unfamiliar to Sier Ruoyan, but she could tell that the person in front of her was her Yao. "But you are right about one thing. A man like him would not want dirty things and feelings." At the time, he was so disheartened that he really thought about returning to the frozen coffin and ending everything with death. But when he thought about how, if he really died, he would have to fulfill your hypocritical regret and let you hang around his grave every day and say some boring regretful nonsense, he didn't want to do it at all. Sier Ruoyan stared at him blankly with her deep red eyes, her fingertips trembling uncontrollably. Even though her head was splitting, she managed to force a smile. "I see. That's great. As long as he is still alive and well, it's great, even if he doesn't forgive me." The cell phone rang. It was Cheng Ying. Gu Qingyao picked up the phone and was about to leave when a figure suddenly rushed over from the safe passage, holding some reflective weapon in his hand and stabbed him in the heart hysterically. "Go to hell. Io." Gu Qingyao only felt a flash before his eyes, and was pushed back by a strong force and hit the edge of the railing, while in front of him was the body of a woman who completely blocked the sharp blade. Jiang Yao's hand was still full of strength as he stared blankly at the knife that had stabbed deeply into Sier Ruoyan's body. It seemed as if there was a leak there and blood soon flowed out. "Yen yen yen yen. You why?" His frightened face suddenly became confused, and his voice became distorted and ghostly, and it was unclear whether he was crying or laughing. Gu Qingyao also looked at Sier Ruoyan in great panic. "You." She frowned in pain, kicked Jiang Yao away fiercely, turned back and smiled. I'm fine, Yao, don't worry. Jiang Yao fell to the side, still looking at Sier Ruoyan, who blocked the knife for Gu Qingyao in panic. Yan, what should I do? I hurt you. He seemed to be severely stimulated. His scalp suddenly exploded, his eyeballs bulged out, and a dark, crazy resentment flashed across his eyes as he stared at Gu Qingyao. Haha, your face has changed now. You can't take Yan away from me. You are my substitute. Muttering and roaring, Jiang Yao rushed over again, trying to push Gu Qingyao directly off the roof. Be careful. Gu Qingyao realized that he had lost control and dodged in time, but in a flash both of his hands were grabbed by someone. When he looked up, he saw Qingying with an anxious look on her face on the right. He subconsciously rushed to her side and hid with her. Qingying rushed over and saw this scene. His heart almost stopped. Fortunately, she was not late. Sier Ruoyan's hand that she tried to protect was shaken away. Looking at the two people in front of her, a hint of bitterness finally emerged between her dry white lips. Boom. There was a loud noise coming from downstairs. Jiang Yao wanted to push Gu Qingyao down, but he fell off the railing because he used too much force. Sier Ruoyan listened to the sound of the ambulance and sirens coming downstairs. She didn't know when brilliant fireworks ignited in the night sky. Her eyes reflected Gu Qingyao's figure with despair and nostalgia. When she lost consciousness, she finally fell down heavily. Chapter 23. Autumn goes and winter comes, and the new year will soon arrive. Ever since the country's first murder case involving a bionic robot with independent consciousness shocked public opinion last month, this matter has become a hot topic among netizens. Someone quickly dug it out. Isn't this Mr. Sier, whose loving wife image collapsed more than a year ago, and her bionic male mistress? I never expected that she had killed her husband in order to cheat on this bionic man, but now she has ended up like this. Bah. You deserve it. Go to hell with your mistress. After the case was settled, the murderer, the android who fell from the building, was quickly sent for recovery and completely eliminated, and Sier Ruoyan, as the accomplice who instigated the crime, was also sentenced to fixed-term imprisonment. At present, all illegally produced bionic people have been sent for recycling. In the third month, the authorities issued detailed rules of the relevant laws, which more strictly prohibit individuals or companies from privately manufacturing bionic people. Gu Qingyao signed his name on the joint guarantee letter of entrepreneurs, walked out of the company, checked the time, and went straight to a private hospital. In front of the bed, his eyes fell on the woman who seemed to be just asleep, and told her. Ruoyan Group officially announced bankruptcy and liquidation yesterday. All your hard work is gone, but as long as you're alive, there's still hope. Although, Sier Ruoyan could not be rescued due to excessive blood loss at that time, and now she has become a complete vegetable. Even if the murderer Jiang Yao did this for her, he also saw clearly that Sier Ruoyan subconsciously blocked the knife for him at that time. There was a complex feeling in Gu Qingyao's eyes, but soon, it returned to calm. He visited her every week during the 3 months she was in a coma. But today is the last time. He showed the engagement ring on his hand, and even though he knew she couldn't see or hear him, he still smiled with relief. Sier Ruoyan, I'm here to say goodbye to you formally today. Thanks for saving me anyway. You said that you are the woman who knows me best in the world, and you know that I will not commit suicide over a betrayed relationship. In fact, I think I am the person who knows you best in this world. When I was terminally ill, you chose to wait for me at all costs. When I was in danger, you would rather die than protect me. Gu Qingyao, who had just woken up, was very dependent on Sier Ruoyan. The housekeeper Jiang Yao seemed to have listened to her instructions and rarely appeared in front of him. Tuya, so, I forgive you. Forgiveness equals letting go. Gu Qingyao really let it go. Goodbye, oh no, I won't see you again, bless you and bless me too. After saying these words, a sincere smile appeared in his slightly moist eyes, and he turned and left, never looking back. His steps were firm and quick, so he didn't notice that the woman on the bed behind him suddenly trembled her fingers. A transparent tear slowly flowed from the corner of my eye. Sier Ruoyan knew that this time, a Yao, who once had his heart and eyes full of her, was really dead completely. In fact, she had killed him with her own hands a long time ago. Outside the hospital, under the deep blue sky, the lights in the huge city are beginning to come on. Cheng Ying had been waiting for him for a long time. When he approached, there was no trace of impatience on her snow-white face. She just held his hand tightly. Gu Qingyao smiled faintly. Have you kept Professor Cheng waiting for a long time? The two held hands, each wearing a ring on the ring finger, sparkling in the hazy night. Shortly after the murder, Gu Qingyao looked at Cheng Ying's face, which had become thinner due to her worry about him, and for some unknown reason took the initiative to propose a relationship with her. And just last month, he proposed to her successfully. Since then, Cheng Ying seemed to have automatically changed her personality, from a cold and aloof goddess to a clingy person. I am still the type who suffers from separation anxiety and I want to be with him all the time. Cheng Ying was silent for 2 seconds, then replied, it doesn't matter how long I wait. After all, I won't argue with a plant. Gu Qingyao was helpless and amused. Professor Cheng, do you still remember that you were a doctor? What about your professional attitude of caring for patients? I don't remember. I forgot. I just remember that I had a patient who was very stubborn and disobedient. He was a real headache. I had no choice but to become his personal physician. It seems like I'll have to apply for this job for the rest of my life. Cheng Ying, look, it's snowing, it's the first snow. Snowflakes fall lightly in the night sky, accompanied by the warm light of street lamps, as we watch the talking and laughing figures of lovers fade away. Winter is burial but also rebirth. From now on, the old road is far away, the time ahead is good and the scenery is endless.